Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. Yeah, we got some more of those stinking financial terrorists for you this show. Let me review for you. So far in the program, we've revealed to you the shenanigans over at Goldman Sachs. Now, Michael Bloomberg is suing the European Central Bank to get them to reveal that Goldman Sachs is the bank that cooked Greece's books to get them into the euro. We also told you about JP Morgan's massive illegal silver short position. We got them so scared, now they've moved their illegal silver short position offshore. Now a new bank in the news, major financial terrorist tearing up the global economy for a few quick bucks. Bank of America. Stacy Herbert, tell me more.
Yes, Max Keiser, Bank of America, is in the news. The first headline I have to read is just hysterical. They're planning on major chaos coming, major anger from the peasants coming regarding their shenanigans, because the first headline reads, wow, Bank of America bought sucks and blows URLs for like everyone at the company. So apparently Bank of America has bought 439 URLs, including things like BrianMoynihanSucks.com, who is the CEO. And then they went out of their way and bought all sorts of URLs for other executives. Catherine BesantSucks.com, and she's just the global technology and operations executive. They bought Sally KrawcheckBlows.com. They also bought BrianMoynihanBlows.com, and so they bought hundreds of these for all these executives.
So let me get this straight. Bank of America, to avoid a public relations problem, went out and bought BrianMoynihanSucks.com. The CEO of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan sucks. BrianMoynihanBlows.com to avoid a public relations problem. And also, of course, in this propaganda war, you want to cover up your crimes of financial terrorism as best as you can, and the people on the internet who suss this stuff out quick, you try to divert attention from them, because God forbid Bank of America should be transparent or obey the law in any way, shape, or form. No, no, no. They want to blow themselves up and everyone around them because Brian Moynihan sucks.com. What else you got?
So let's look at some of the reasons why they might be wanting to secure all of these URLs. The next headline reads, OMG for oh my God. Bank of America foreclosure thugs break into woman's house and steal cremated ashes of her husband. So Bank of America is accused of breaking into a Truckee, California woman's home and stealing all of her belongings, including Persian rugs, her son's skiing medals, and the cremated ashes of her husband.
Yeah, Brian Moynihan steals the cremated ash of his clients.com. No. I mean, seriously, Bank of America, it's perfect, isn't it? Because America has become kind of the nexus of this entire global farce that is the kleptocracy destroying both the environment and also through the austerity measures that are being imposed on folks that had nothing to do with creating these debts. But tell me more, Stacy Herbert.
Well, it's not just stealing the ashes of, dead women, of a woman's dead husband. Arizona sues Bank of America, alleges loan modification fraud. So this program run by Timothy Geithner at the Treasury called HAMP, where it's supposed to help keep people in their homes. Well, attorneys general in Arizona and Nevada filed civil lawsuits Friday against Bank of America, alleging that the lender is misleading and deceiving homeowners who have tried to modify mortgages in two of the nation's most foreclosure-damaged states. So apparently hundreds of homeowners kept making their mortgage payments because Bank of America repeatedly assured them that their loans were being modified. Instead, many of them lost their homes instead.
Yeah, they're lying. Brian Moynihan lies.com. Well, it's not. They should change the program name from HAMP to prison, because that's basically what Bank of America is trying to do, is to create a new American prison program to keep people wrongfully imprisoned in these shacks that they sold these fraudulently induced mortgages to. And pretty soon they're just going to turn the gas up to high, and that'll be the final solution for Bank of America's mortgage fraud crisis solution, I'm sure.
Well, Max, the other thing to note about this is that the reason why Bank of America, and the allegations are that actually meant all of the banks were doing this, including JP Morgan and other banks involved in the mortgage market, is that they're basically collecting massive fees from the government, i.e. the taxpayer, in order to modify these loans. They collect the fee, they keep the fee, and then they turn around and tell the mortgage holder that in fact they don't qualify. So then kick the person out of their home, keep the fee, and this is the story through the entire financial fraud market, is that they're just collecting little fees and fees and fees, nickel and diming the taxpayer everywhere they can.
Yeah, well, this is the whole story of the bailout, isn't it? They said that they were going to use the money to restore the balance sheets of the banks, but they just pay themselves these enormous fees, and they left the debts on the bank's balance sheets. And going forward in 2011, we will find out that the banks are holding another $20 trillion in bad debts that they have yet disclosed. I see something coming up. This is truly remarkable. You would think after Enron we had seen the last of this, but please tell the people, tell the people.
Well, the headline reads, Max, Ernst & Young charged with Lehman fraud. New York's Attorney General Andrew Cuomo charged accounting firm Ernst & Young with fraud for allegedly helping Lehman Brothers conceal billions of dollars in debt prior to the bank's collapse. Remember, this is a civil lawsuit. In the lawsuit, New York Attorney General and incoming Governor Andrew Cuomo charged Ernst & Young with helping Lehman remove tens of billions of dollars in securities from its balance sheet in order to deceive the public about Lehman's true liquidity condition.
You know, I reported on this extensively when it was happening. I called it peekaboo accounting. This is a common ruse on Wall Street where before the reporting is meant to be filed with the regulators, you simply move debts around as part of this enormous Ponzi scheme or hide the parcel scheme. Now Ernst & Young, of course, has been revealed as the accounting firm that is engaged in the fraud, and their defense, of course, is that, well, the lawyers said we could do it. The lawyers said we could do it, so it's legal because we paid off a bunch of lawyers to write a shyster opinion to say we could commit accounting fraud for Lehman Brothers while they were committing mortgage fraud. So all the banks on Wall Street could commit securitized mortgage fraud around the world, putting banks all over the world into dire straits. And of course, this gets right back to the Enron scandal. Arthur Andersen was caught doing something similar. They went out of business or were sucked up by one of these other major accounting firms. And the entire business model of Wall Street and by association America is fraud. As I've said before, if you took fraud out of the American business model, you'd have nothing left except donuts and guns. Now going forward, what's left that can't be incriminating evidence that would require the government to shut down Ernst & Young? Are they really going to let ErnstandYoung.com, Ernst & Young sucks the big one.com, Ernst & Young blows the big one.com, are they going to let these freaking shysters breathe another oxygen at all?
Well, Max, actually, a lot of this fraud, it didn't just happen in America. The crucial role played by the European banks is evident in this event as well, because the assets were taken off the Lehman Brothers balance sheet, transferred to European banks, and then in order to hide the bad debts, and then they were transferred back. So it's the global banking system. These guys are interconnected, and the fraud seeks whatever jurisdiction will allow them to basically commit these frauds.
Right, there's reciprocity in the banking sector. So Lehman commits the fraud using a foreign bank, Deutsche Bank, for example, one of the banks. And then when it's Deutsche Bank's turn to report, they reciprocate by hiding bad debts on Lehman's balance sheet. And they go back and forth like this. This is how you end up with $600 trillion or so in derivatives, so-called. This is just bad debt that's being created to hide more debt and to shuttle this debt around the world in ways that give banks the illusion of reporting profits when there are no profits to report. And remember, Enron went from an $80 billion company to zero in a matter of minutes when it was revealed that they had just been a huge accounting scandal.
So I want to point out here, by the way, that as I mentioned at the top of this item, that it is a civil lawsuit. This is outright obvious criminal behavior, and yet these banks, for some reason, get over and over charged with civil fines, and that are very small compared to the crime committed and the damage done. Because look at this, what Andrew Cuomo says is our lawsuit seeks to recover the fees collected by Ernst & Young, while it was supposed to be using accountable, honest measures to protect the public. So all they're seeking are the fees that Ernst & Young collected while committing this fraud.
Andrew Cuomo, of course, he's politically motivated to do whatever he can, just like Rudolph Giuliani was politically motivated to go after Lehman Brothers and go after Drexel Burnham in his day, and that launched his political career. But of course, Andrew Cuomo, we'll see whether he's actually serious about restoring some kind of justice to the system.
Max, actually, I would say the opposite, because, Mike Milken went to prison. He did his time. He did years in prison. He was forbidden to ever trade securities ever in the existence of his life again. Ernst & Young, which helped commit these crimes, there's no suggestion whatsoever that anybody will face any sort of criminal charge.
Well, this is the remarkable thing. With each ensuing scandal, the lessons learned by Wall Street is how to not get caught the next time they break any of these laws, instead of modifying their behavior and not to break laws. Their mentality is, how do we not get caught next time?
Exactly.
And they're doing a good job not getting caught.
The politicians increasingly provide cover for them. So what they're doing is the public says, oh, but we punished Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young paid $1 billion fine, which was just the $1 billion that they made on committing this fraud. They think that they've been punished, even though the guy didn't do any jail time like Mike Milken did. Mike Milken took his punishment. He went to prison. He served his time. He's not allowed to trade securities. These people are allowed to continue to exist to commit another crime for another day.
Right, and that $1 billion that they pay in the fine is just borrowed from the Fed and then circulated in the global derivatives market for a couple of years until it blows up, and then the government forces the public, austerity, to pay for that $1 billion in the long run anyway. So the public has to pay 2 times, for the fraud committed by the bank, and then for the bailout that gets first circulated as a derivative that blows up and forced the public to pay through via austerity measures. Thank you so much, Stacy Herbert, for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All righty. Now, after the break, I'll be talking with journalist and author Afshin Rattansi, so don't go away.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time to talk in London with Afshin Rattansi, author and journalist. Afshin, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi there, Max.
You sound really enthusiastic, Afshin. Let's come on, get up.
It's wintry weather. Wintry weather here in London. The whole transport infrastructure is falling apart, and I don't suppose there's much Keynesian stimulus on the cards here either.
Well, you're a former risk analyst at Lloyd's. I mean, couldn't you have foreseen? Didn't somebody foresee that cold weather could have eventually hit the UK? How were they so totally unprepared?
Very complicated to think that in winter it would get colder. And besides, the whole point is we don't really think that governments should really be involved in investment in infrastructure, especially in a time of recession, because that might kickstart the economy. That seems to be the current thinking here in London.
All right, so you mentioned Keynesianism, which of course government spending. Then you've got the people over in the monetarist camp that think that your Bank of England and the central banks can kickstart the whole thing. You also handed me something here interesting about the Bank of England warns of a 5% interest rate rise. Now, there's a lot to be said about this notion of a natural interest rate being 5%. What are your thoughts here? Is it Keynesian stimulus, monetarist kind of tweaking? Is it going to be an Austrian school return to the gold standard, or just a lot more of the same going nowhere?
Well, I suppose the most important thing is many studies are already showing that poverty is increasing in the United Kingdom, and people are saying that the coalition government, which no one voted for in this country, said that, well, their policies are going to increase poverty. If interest rates, as the Monetary Policy Committee member Paul Fisher seems to be saying, are going to be 10 times what they are now, I think that'll have some kind of effect on the housing market, don't you?
Well, the fact is that if you increase interest rates, yes, you will hit the housing market in a substantial way. So politically, there will be no increase in interest rates. As a matter of fact, the Bank of England is engaged in quantitative easing for the very reason they want to keep interest rates artificially low, which of course is only causing asset prices like precious metals and other and stocks to have this sugar high of artificially high prices. And at the lower end, of course, the austerity measures are being imposed on a vast swath of the population. Is there going to be, I see some meaningful pushback here in London with the student rebellion and the student riots. Is this a big trend going forward in 2011, do you think, Afshin Rattansi?
I think definitely we have a year ahead in Britain of massive strikes ahead. After all, the IMF and World Bank, Bretton Woods type austerity in places like Ireland and Greece is nothing compared to what the government here are doing without even being ordered to by international institutions. People are getting ready to strike here in every major aspect of the economy. So it'll be very interesting to see how that will affect political constraints and political policies, because how far can a government cut in the way that the British government is and survive that kind of onslaught? Those pictures of rioting are all around the world.
Well, the cuts really haven't hit yet. So tell us a little bit about how the cuts will affect Britons.
I think cuts certainly in basic services, whether it be cleaning and road sweeping and utilities and local government spending, people are going to really start suffering. Then when we have, of course, the government here wants to continue its privatization plan. They're going to privatize the post office here for more money for the exchequer. But there will be strikes again in all the services here because of these cuts.
Has privatization worked? I mean, it seems like they privatize hospitals and they're failing. They privatize rail system and they're failing. They privatize education with these top-up fees. That scheme is failing. Privatization in the Thatcher era was a failure. Why don't they just realize that that has been a colossal failure? Is the coalition government ready to try something else now, maybe?
Well, other pictures from Britain that have been making the news all around the world have been the airports. And one of the first privatizations of the Thatcher government was the British Airports Authority, which wasn't even allowing media in to cover the wartime conditions suffered during the Christmas period, as people couldn't travel from the busiest international airport in the world. But there's privatization, British Airports Authority. And of course, a sell-off to French companies of gas and water utilities.
All right, so British Airport Authority, one of the first enterprises to be privatized by Margaret Thatcher. It becomes controlled by private interests. A lot of people are saying, well, the reason why there aren't enough plain de-icers and there is no ability to deal with this crisis because the private shareholders effectively have bankrupted the BAA so that it's just working on a subsistence basis. And isn't this one of the problems of privatization, is that you've got an entrenched oligarchs just skimming the cream off the top and leaving institutions like the airports not being able to function outside of an absolute very narrow set of climate conditions. Isn't this true, basically, Afshin, that they're being skimmed off the top here?
But wouldn't the coalition government respond by saying, but the pension funds are investing in these privatized companies, so we're all in this together, and we should all suffer it together, and we shouldn't invest in de-ices for runways because it'll hit all of our profits in terms of pensions. That would be their argument, I suppose.
Well, we heard the same argument during the BP disaster in the Gulf in the United States, that something like some high number, 1 in 4 perhaps, I'll check my numbers, are invested in BP stock. Therefore, it's not in anyone's interest to hold BP accountable for an eco-holocaust. I suppose under that logic, if Auschwitz had been trading publicly in Britain, British people would not go after Hitler because they own too much stock in Auschwitz. I mean, by the same logic. Where am I failing in my analysis, Ashton?
Precisely. So you must support authority at all costs, because we'll all suffer if you don't support authority. Sounds a bit like a British novelist's dystopia to me.
There's 2 major dystopian novels of the last century. 1984, Brave New World. 1984 is one of total control. Brave New World is one of total frivolity. People descending into Dancing with the Stars with Vince Cable while his career burns, and other distractions. Which path are we going on? You're an author. You're a journalist. Are we going down the total control of 1984 or the total frivolity of Brave New World, Ashton? What's your analysis going forward?
Well, when it comes to the British Business Secretary, this program is going out on the Sky platform, Rupert Murdoch's platform. We now know that criticising the great Rupert Murdoch is not a good thing at all. In fact, the British Labour Party, the opposition, was so quick out of the gate to say, this is terrible. The Business Secretary, to remind your viewers, said that he didn't like Rupert Murdoch that much, whether it be across the Atlantic or here in Europe. Rupert Murdoch is a kind of god figure for all of us, I think.
I don't get it. In other words, Vince Cable says what's on everybody's mind. Murdoch's trying to take over the media space. Murdoch puts out a bunch of pablum for the masses. He lies about the war. He's a war profiteer. Why can't those statements from Vince Cable simply be picked up by Cameron and the coalition government and saying, hot diggity dog, Vince Cable speaking the truth. Let's get rid of the schmata Murdoch from our airspace and open it up to real competition. Why can't he just go with the truth instead of hiding the fact that their entire media space is being corrupted by interests of war profiteers and jackasses like Murdoch?
Well, I think the current Secretary for Culture, who will now adjudicate over Rupert Murdoch's balance sheet shenanigans over Sky, has a very different view. He will be adjudicating on that decision on competition, and he said that we all owe a debt to Rupert Murdoch for his services to journalism.
Let's move on to Tony of Arabia. Of course, Tony frickin' I'm a liar Blair. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair, he's raking in tens of millions of dollars from the monarchs and the derivative wielders he enabled through his corrupt regime here in Britain. Is anyone but the Daily Mail even interested in this Tony Blair schmata corruption?
It's even more worrying than that Roman Polanski film of the novel by Robert Harris, which seemed to allege that he was a pawn many years before of the Americans, or at least his wife was, I think, in that film. I think people just seem to ignore it. It just shows how people can get away with it. He continues to be Middle East envoy. I wonder what sort of, in the coming year, what we're going to witness in the occupied territories as Tony Blair wanders around the earth trying to help peace in that region.
All right, now you mentioned the Roman Polanski film that came out at the same time, the scandal when Polanski was held by the Swiss authorities during the point in time when that film was coming out. That
was very odd, wasn't it? Odd timing.
Yeah, exactly. The timing was suspect. Now we've got, of course, the Julian Assange WikiLeaks story where, last year I was watching a video of Julian Assange praising the freedom of Sweden and the press freedom of America. Within a year now, he was wanted for arrest by Swedish authorities and to be extradited to America, which has become a gulag casino state. I want to ask your opinion about something. In America, in the progressive talk radio space, they're trying to portray Julian Assange now and the WikiLeaks story as a quote-unquote false flag attack. The cyber 9/11 giving cover for the government to come in and impose all kinds of new draconian regulations on the internet. Are you buying into that meme, Ashton Hortanzi?
What does sophisticated media the United States have? They're even talking about the actual cables. Over here in Britain, alas, all the BBC could ask Julian Assange was how many women he'd slept with. So without even commenting on the conspiracy theories surrounding the kinds of leaks that are emerging from the WikiLeaks cables, alas, here in Britain, the story here is just about rape, unfortunately.
But I wanted to get into this a little bit more, Ashton, because it's you say that, at least in America, they're talking about it, but they're not really talking about it because in a big, let's say, radio outlet like Infowars.com with Alex Jones, they've picked up on this idea that the WikiLeaks arrest and scandal is more about a cyber false flag attack. Everything seemingly is a false flag attack. In my view, that's not the case. It's a genuine release of internal documents in the name and in the cause of free speech. Is this how you see it from your point of view, or are you seeing it more as this plant by the CIA to create a cyber 9/11?
I think it's very difficult to tell, isn't it? I think one thing, aside from whether, I don't think Julian Assange is a CIA agent. I think that's out of the question. But certainly reading the cables, one has to be very careful because these are, after all, U.S. diplomats and U.S. staff trying to impress the Secretary of State in the United States, whether it be under George W. Bush or beforehand. So one has to read them with a degree of care. I don't think even the Guardian newspaper or the New York Times or Der Spiegel is necessarily using that care because they're very quick to say, oh, this means this. I think you have to look at what these cables say with a lot of diligence to truly decode them. But certainly what comes out is that the US and its allies have been violating any kind of UN law, any kind of post-1945 consensus on what it is to be a reputable, democratic, principled country that abides by anything close to the US Constitution, let alone the UN Charter.
All right, Afshin Rattansi, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Afshin Rattansi. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.